So sit comfortably, and before you begin to close your eyes, just relax your body. Take a deep breath, and remind yourself to relax your mind. In my meaning of the word, it means to remind yourself you don't have to follow all of the thoughts that are coursing through your mind right now. The memories, some plans, judgments about the present. You could talk about thoughts that are past-oriented, future-oriented, or present. Thoughts about the present. You don't have to worry about anything. If you have a little bit of experience of Buddhism, just remembering that there's nothing to worry about. There's nothing that I need within cyclic existence that's going to be a real source of pleasure. It's all the nature of suffering. And then just begin by looking at something very, very subtle, your heartbeat, which you don't have to create. Can you sense that? If you can, get a little glimmer of that, just slightly turn your attention to your respiration. If you notice you're controlling it, bring your attention back to your heart for a second, so that the breathing is just controlled by your natural brain stem. Then watch the breathing. Just watch it. Recognize when you're breathing in, recognize when you're breathing out, especially the end points. Just the end of an inhalation when you're about to begin the exhalation. Try to sense that spot, and vice versa at the end of the exhalation. Occasionally watch the tension in your body and let go of it. You want to keep your mind alert, but your body relaxed. Relaxed within the discipline of keeping the spine straight. Withdraw your attention away from your eyes and your ears. Begin to hunker down in your heart and just watch. Imagine the breathing as it comes in your nostrils, as it fills up your lungs. It's the end of the inhalation, and then just when it begins to change direction, the diaphragm and the lungs begin to change their direction. If you notice thoughts coming, just let them go. And be satisfied with this simple object at first that is reflecting the nature of impermanence. We meet friends, like breathing in. We remain for some time, like the end of the inhalation, and then slowly separate, either because of outer circumstances or death. When the breathing has calmed down and you're fairly well focused on it, that would be the time to bring your attention to your heart chakra, as though following the breath up the nostrils, as though it were going to the crown of your head this time, rather than directly to your lungs, down to your throat and your heart. And then leave your attention there. Stop watching the breathing. And just watch your mind, with the mind. That means your thinking mind, your mental consciousness. It has no color or shape, so don't be molded by what's coming into your eye consciousness. Bring your attention down to your heart chakra. If you can, in a sense, drawing your attention away from the senses like a tortoise or a turtle pulls in its head and legs, its 5 limbs. Try to get a mental picture of the nature of the consciousness, its conventional nature, as being spacious, clear, unobstructing, not having any color or shape. So when we say clear, whatever arises to your consciousness is reflected like a clear mirror. If the thoughts arise, try to see the space between them and focus on that. Let it begin to get larger. Less thoughts, more space. Even when the thoughts are present, inferring the spaciousness of the mind within which they're arising. Take your attention away from the objective thoughts, refocus it on the subjective mind. It's clear and knowing entity. Like a vast space, if there's still the sense of the presence of your body that's appearing to your mental consciousness, also like an image, withdraw your attention away from that and just ask yourself, what is the consciousness that's perceiving that appearance of the body? It's like turning your back to something that's facing you to try to know the knower, try to perceive the knower, rather than that which is being known. When you get a sense of that pure consciousness, let that engulf your awareness. Let that be your entire object of observation. Like a watchmaker with his monocle on, very small tools and magnifying glass and light, concentrated on one small little thing to the exclusion of everything else. This spaciousness of the mind allows us to develop within it all of the good qualities that we do not yet have, or those qualities that we have to enhance them within this space. They're not limited. This space can be cleaned out of all of the faulty states of mind, anger, attachment, low self-esteem, laziness, jealousy. We can develop a very acute wisdom in this mind to overcome our ignorance. This is our conventional Buddha nature, a resource that we have, part of our perfect human rebirth, the resources that we have. With this opportunity that I have obtained occasionally throughout numberless lives within cyclic existence, ever so infrequently, been born as a human. Most of those times the teachings about good heart and wisdom didn't appear in the world. When they did, I might have been born in a different place in the world. When I was born with them, I might have been overcome by other worldly ambitions, distractions. this time, for this short life, I've met the Dharma that's still alive. And I can recognize that it can help me to open my wisdom eye, to recognize what to practice and what to avoid. I can work on healing myself in a fundamental way, not simply right now to find more pleasure, more worldly pleasure, but to seek a real solution, existential solution, to create the framework to achieve either nirvana or enlightenment in the future. Developing renunciation, good heart, wisdom. But this life is very short, very fragile. There's no assurance that I will live out today, this week, this month, this year. Death comes to everyone. There's no way to avoid it. And with every passing instant, we're getting closer to death. Closer to losing this precious opportunity to practice the Dharma. The only thing that can help us at the time of death. So with that thought in mind, coupled with the plight of all living beings, we're in exactly the same situations, many of whom have not found a perfect human rebirth, most of whom have not, are struggling with encyclic existence. Even those who have found a perfect human rebirth, overcome by their egos, engaged in amazing soap operas of the present appearance of this lifetime, based on the sense of some kind of truly existent, inherently existent self. I'm going to use what time I have left this lifetime to work for their benefit, especially this evening. I'm going to participate in a class to learn about shunyata, emptiness. To develop even greater sense of compassion for others who are grasping to a self, getting angry, working for their own selfish agendas. And as a tool to achieve enlightenment, one of the two wings that can help us soar into the sky of enlightenment, along with bodhicitta, compassionate, altruistic mind to achieve enlightenment for the sake of others, wisdom of emptiness. I'm going to participate tonight in order to achieve enlightenment. That's my goal, for the sake of all living beings. And then bring your attention back, present. So, some 2,500 years ago, Shakyamuni Buddha began teaching by teaching the Four Noble Truths in Deer Park, Bodh Gaya, after having achieved enlightenment in Bodh Gaya. But his aim from the very beginning was to lead people to this realization that we're talking about tonight, the understanding of emptiness. I wonder, what do you think? Some of you have heard of emptiness. Do you think emptiness is something very precious? What do you think, Gabe? Emptiness is thinking.
Precious?
Yeah.
Yes.
Emptiness is very precious. It's very rare, right? You don't find emptiness everywhere. So this doesn't have emptiness as its nature. The excrement in the toilet doesn't have emptiness as its nature. The cars in the street, every atom of the universe. My teacher Lama Yeshe used to say, it's not emptiness that's precious. It's the wisdom that perceives emptiness. Emptiness is there. Emptiness is the ultimate nature of all phenomena. What is precious is the understanding that can perceive it. That's rare. And that's something that's very liberating. It can help us solve our problems. Coupled with one of two motivations, it can help us to achieve either nirvana or enlightenment. Coupled with renunciation of samsara, the wisdom of emptiness, can help us to achieve nirvana, personal liberation. Coupled with a higher motivation, Mahayana motivation of altruism, bodhicitta, the wisdom of emptiness can cleanse all the subtle stains from our mind and help us to achieve total enlightenment. Okay? So that wisdom is very precious. Emptiness, emptiness is everywhere. It's like the conventional nature of phenomena is always unified with its ultimate nature, its emptiness, like two sides of a coin. What did they say, Alexander in Italy? Due facce de medaglia? The medaglia. The two faces of the medal or of the coin, two sides of the coin. They're never separated. You might say, but we can saw it down the middle. You can imagine heads. You can separate the head from the tail, right? But then it's no longer a coin, no longer a medallion. So what is emptiness? What's the how can we begin to understand emptiness? When the Buddha first taught the Four Noble Truths, he didn't, from the very beginning, speak explicitly about emptiness. He began to talk about what he called selflessness, an-atma. Do you know the word atma? Have some of you heard? Do you know the word atma? Yeah. We had some of our Indian students here before. It was always good to throw out some Indian words at them. You've probably heard the word atma in some combinations like Mahatma Gandhi, Maha-atma, the great being or the great soul. Atma is a word that kind of means self or soul, ego. You can translate it different ways. In Tibetan, it's the word dak, which sometimes just means I, me. So when the Buddha's observation in his own experience was that the sense of self within us, it seems so real, that we can call the soul, say in the Abrahamic religions, say Catholic or Christian, when we talk about the soul, God created the heavens and the earth and the souls, right? That sense that we have of something enduring that is beyond the superficial body and mind, that seems to be really there, the experiencer of our everyday, happiness and suffering and observations and so forth. That soul doesn't exist the way that it appears. There is no such Atma, an-Atma. So most of the Hindus, the Vedic faiths of India kind of, although they say that the Buddha, I think they say, was the fourth avatar, sort of emanation of Vishnu, something like that, right? Have you heard? They accept that he was, but what he was doing was trying to get people, he was proposing a wrong system, they say, because he said there was no self, there was no Atma. But he was trying to get people back into the fold by teaching this wrong thing. We Buddhists don't believe that. We believe that he was right. And it's been the experience of the great meditators that have achieved nirvana and enlightenment. So what does this mean? Let's take, first of all, just this first teaching about the personal self, selfless or selflessness. Because this is an example of emptiness applied to the person. When you talk about a person or self, that self is empty of existing the way that it appears to our minds. The crucial thing is to try to in your own experience, observe how the self does appear to the mind. This is one of the crucial points in meditation. Observing at first your own sense of self. There may be many, many different manifestations of how your self appears to you when you're casually thinking about it, even if you're trying to think about it or trying to dwell within your own mind. Is the self something that's perceived by your eyes, by the way? Well, you might have a doubt. Maybe you think, yeah, I can see myself. I see myself in the mirror. But when you think about it, the body itself doesn't cover all the instances of self. Right? How about your mind, which is not material? The mental experience. Is that the self? Well, not entirely, because if you stick a needle into your finger or stub your toe on the landing and fall down the steps, that is an example. You say, I fell down the steps. You're not talking so much about your mind fell down the steps. I stubbed my toe. So there is a sense, when you begin to investigate, look for the self, how it appears to your mind. There are many different variations, but when you begin to discard some of them and look more and more carefully how the I appears to how the self, the most subtle form of the self that appears, it seems to be something that's perceived by our mental consciousness. There's an appearance to our mental consciousness. Not necessarily a shape or color, not that kind of appearance, but a sense of the self as being, when we begin to try to locate it, seems to be that which is the experiencer of our senses, that which knows what we see and judges it, that which knows what we hear and, is happy when we hear nice things, is unhappy when we hear criticism and so forth. Not just the mental consciousness itself, but a sense of ownership. The self as opposed to, let's say, the I, capital I, as opposed to the mine, that which the I possesses. There's both senses in our mind. the sense of I. Here, this is another synonym for self. Who am I? You could say that, I am an American, I am a man, I'm a woman, I am a banker, I'm a Buddhist, whatever, many different intellectual things. But when you discard those, at the very core of them, of those experiences or those thoughts, there's something which is innate in us. The appearance of a self or I. Here I'm using I, not E-Y-E, but capital I. The sense of I or self or ego or soul. It's as though it really exists. It's as though it has a findable nature, even though we don't investigate to try to find it. It's almost as though it seems so tangible and real, we should be able to find it. Existing in and of itself. Without investigation, it seems to be unreliant on anything else. You don't like that? Or you just had a sour candy moment? Igor, yeah. You thought. You must have. There's some of the candies in the box there's some that are sweet and then there's some that are sour. I thought he'd just had a lime moment or something. Meditators who after many years of study, go to the cave to try to meditate and realize emptiness, they say that one of the first things they do is spend many months, maybe 6 months, finding the I, the subtlemost sense of the self-identity that appears to the mind. Not refuting it at first, just watching how it appears. Getting a very clear appearances, almost as though they could, it's not elusive any longer. Right now, if you try to find the I, the sense of I, it's almost like I'm not sure what, phantom or something. You try to, or some slippery kind of what's it called? The pig that you put oil on.
Slimy.
Slimy?
The slimy stuff?
Yeah, slimy stuff, yeah. Or there's an American thing about trying to catch the greased pig. Maybe it's Italian also. That sounds very Italian. You try to grab it and it slips away. When you try to observe the I, you get some sense of it, but you can't really observe it very carefully, very clearly. So it takes a very high degree of concentration. One of the talks that the center asked a couple of weeks ago was on how to develop concentration, what we call tranquil abiding. So really you need a very concentrated mind, not just to understand the theory about emptiness, but to actually realize it. I'm going to try to satisfy my eye here for a second with some Coke Zero. Very appropriate. The term zero comes from the Sanskrit word shunya, right? Did you know that?
No.
Empty. Zero. Like Coke Zero. Thank you, Jeff, for this offering to shunyata. Hopefully not offering to shunyata, offering to shunyata wisdom, offering to attain that. So the Buddha talked about selflessness, first of all. He didn't talk about emptiness right from the very beginning. In the Theravada tradition, have you heard? Do you know the difference between the Theravada and the Mahayana teachings? Have you heard? Yeah. Is it Jason? Is that true? Yeah. Have you heard?
Yeah.
Jen? Jen's husband? What's Jen's husband's name?
Chuck.
Chuck. Okay. I don't have to call him Jen's husband. So, the Buddha taught essentially two vehicles to final solutions to our existential problem. I think it was, so I've read recently that Wittgenstein, the famous philosopher, talked about the existential problem as being like the fly in the bottle. We all want to get out. We all want to get out of the bottle. Somehow we feel constrained. So how do we get out? One of the solutions is what Buddha called, what he referred to as nirvana. It was an Indian word that existed before him and referred to some exalted state where you no longer were reborn again and again in cyclic existence without your choice. Nirvana as opposed to samsara. That's the goal of his lesser vehicle. Lesser in the sense that it's like a miniature car. It can only bring one person to that goal. You're just working for your own liberation. He also taught another goal, which he called bodhi, or enlightenment. Again, it was an Indian word that existed before him. Awakening, like the blossoming of a lotus, or awakening from the sleep of ignorance. That was something beyond nirvana. It was motivated out of a concern for all living beings from the very beginning. And its goal was one in which you would be motivated, you would be spontaneously able to emanate and help all living beings once you achieve that state of enlightenment. Omniscient mind. So in his teachings at the very beginning, he ostensibly was teaching the lesser vehicle, the remnant of which exists today is called the Theravada tradition. Thera is a Pali word that means elder. Vada means proponent, or the speech, or the system of the elders, you might say, the Theravada. Staiviravada in Sanskrit. So that's the main proponent of the Hinayana system today. In those teachings that the Buddha gave when he taught the Four Noble Truths, he was referring to just the self of the person as the main thing to be recognized, to identify how it appears to your mind, and to eventually understand how it doesn't exist the way that it's appearing, so that we are actually without such a self. That doesn't mean that there's no mat, that there's no Igor. Although we might wish that sometimes. Not Matt. Matt's indispensable, but Igor. I'm just teasing. There is an Igor. There is a Matt. How they exist, though, is much different than the way that we imagine. Mat is a phenomena, is a person. So there is a self, an Atma. There is a self, there is an Atma called Mat, but it's not the one that appears to Mat's mind. The predominant thing that's appearing to his mind is a sense of self that's the owner of the body and mind, something that's existing, in a sense, independent of the body and mind, owning it, controlling it, existing from its own side. Whereas the Mat that does exist, the self or Atma that does exist, is something much, much more subtle, almost like a rainbow. It's the concept Mat, or the name that we can give to that concept, that is attributed to this body and mind combination. We say the five aggregates sometimes, or you can just subsume all five aggregates into body and mind, right? Labeling that body and mind Mat, it has a consistency, it has a conventional reality that goes on from day by day, We recognize Matt yesterday, today, tomorrow, and we can call that Matt. That's a person. That's the self that does exist. When the Buddha said no self or selfless, he wasn't saying that, all of this was, what was it, like Matrix? Remember the Matrix? Everything was just in the mind, that there was nothing out there at all. There is a self out here. There is a self attributed to us, but it's not the self that we're imagining right now. The self that appears to us, that we go along with, it's not so much that we're imagining it from our own self, our own side. It's appearing due to our instincts from numberless lifetimes in the past. It's not something that you have to think up, and it's just like inferior people have thought up this I. There are concepts of the I, the ego and so forth, that are embellished by our delusions. But this innate sense of the I is something that's part and parcel of all of our minds, a basic kind of appearance to our minds that is believed or grasped by our consciousness. That grasping, that believing in that, assenting to that, going along with that, is what's called ignorance. The basic ignorance that's the root of cyclic existence. That's what we'd like to get rid of. That's what's called avidya. Have you ever heard of that? Avidya? The Vedas, you've heard of the Vedas. So Veda has to do with, not the word Veda, has to do with knowledge. Avidya means not knowing. The syllable at the beginning is like a negative particle. Like what do we have in English? Irreligious, unbelievable. And there's different prefixes that have come from different languages into English that show non, right? Non means no, right? So non-self, unknowing, not knowing, avidya, is the part of our mind that's believing in this self that appears to us, unbeknownst to us. We right now are not aware of the way this self does exist as this very, very subtle phenomena that is simply conceptualized. Igor, Jeff, Alexandra, they all are persons, they're all selves, they all exist, but much different than the way our mind perceives right now. So the Buddha taught selflessness, not to say that there was no self whatsoever, but to say that there's no self the way that it is appearing to our mind. So the first step in realizing emptiness, the yogis, when they go off to meditate, yogis, yoginis, male and female practitioners, they will watch their own mind, first develop concentration and watch their own mind, all of the variations of the self that might appear over a long period of time. Just watching carefully to try to identify that which always is there, sort of the core of all those appearances of self, what we call the innate appearance of the self. And once they've identified that, also to identify the mind's reaction to that appearance. Does the mind go along with that appearance? Does it sort of just accept that it's, so like if you had, I don't know, Casper the ghost appearing right next to you. You're noticing, you know who Casper the ghost is? I wasn't sure. Just appearing next to you, out of the corner of your eye, you might think, oh, this is a hologram, or you might actually think there is a real ghost there, right? So this kind of ghost-like appearance of the I this appearance of the I, how does the mind react to it? Does it disbelieve it or does it believe it? Well, the yogis recognize that the mind does believe it. It goes along with that sense of self. That ignorance is what's called self-grasping ignorance. Have you heard that expression? Avidya, or in Tibetan, marikpa. Ma is the negative particle in Tibetan. Rikpa means knowing. Avidya, marikpa. It's not simply unaware of something. This kind of ignorance is what we might call a proactive type of ignorance. It is perceiving something in the wrong way. It's believing something that doesn't exist to exist. Like Casper the ghost, oh, there's Casper the ghost. Or maybe a more classical example. The Buddha didn't talk about Casper the ghost. A mirage. Is anyone here has never seen a mirage? You all seen it sometime, maybe on the highway when we're driving, even in Washington here. You don't have to be in the desert, but you all know what a mirage is. A mirage is a wavering sense in the distance, a vision that appears to the mind or to the eyesight to be water, and the mind may go along with it and think that there's water. If you're driving, sometimes you put on the brakes thinking that there's a pool of water ahead. Or has that ever happened to any of you? It's happened to me sometimes. It's just a mirage. If you're in the desert and you're thirsty and maybe dying of thirst, you may run off toward that mirage thinking that there's water there. If I said that the mirage was empty of water, would that have some meaning for you? Does that make sense, that terminology? It appears to be water, but it is devoid of water. That's kind of the sense of emptiness. The self appears to be findable. Not just the self that's labeled, that's designated, that's named to your body and mind, that concept. Something very, very subtle, but it seems to be something very, very concrete and findable, existing from its own side. You can't find it. We've never really sought it in the past. Its presence is kind of like that sense of Casper the ghost, just there next to you, behind you or something, always there. So when the yogis or yoginis endeavor to realize emptiness, they first look for this innate sense of the I, the innate appearance of the I, and the innate grasping to it, the innate response of the consciousness. One thing is the appearance, one thing is how our mind reacts to that appearance. Two different things. It's not too much to remember, two things. Right? If I ask you to remember three things, it's starting to get a little more difficult, but two things. The appearance of the self is one problem, but the main problem is how our mind reacts to that appearance. Our mind reacts to that appearance by believing it, holding on to it, assenting to it. Yeah, it's there. Not like the wise person in the desert who disbelieves, who knows that the mirage is empty of water. Two people in the desert. One is deluded by the mirage, thinking it's real water. Another person who knows it's devoid of water can put their attention into other signs of water, maybe where the water birds are circling some little area, knows that there might be some water there. It's said that the first realization of emptiness concerns the emptiness of the self, not the emptiness of other phenomena. In fact, in the Theravada teachings, in the Hinayana, the lesser vehicle, the Buddha didn't explicitly talk about emptiness of all phenomena. He talked about just the emptiness of the self. But the word he used wasn't even emptiness there. He didn't use the word shunyata. He used the word anatma, no self, selfless. That's the thing that is most intimate to us, our own self-identity. And the recognition of selflessness is capable of bringing about an incredible change in our behavior. If you recognized, if you had an insight into emptiness of the self, an insight into selflessness, and you focused on that for some time and became confident of that, I mean, eventually you can realize it intimately, we could say nakedly, directly. We could have a direct perception of that. But that's something that would come after a long, long time of meditation. But even to have some glimpse of it and to develop some confidence in that erodes the basis for our other delusions. The sense of self and our belief in it, that ignorance that believes in the self, lies at the root of all of our delusions. Our attachment, our anger, our confusion, our jealousy, our pride, our low self-esteem, all of them have as their root the ignorance that grasps to this self that doesn't really exist, believes it, like believing in the water in the mirage. I was hearing that sound. I was thinking that was due to my twisting my body one side. That was my spine or something. Then I realized it wasn't. Did you hear that just a second? I thought it was... That was why I was bending. I just checked.
Mirage.
What's that? Like a mirage. Right? There's a quotation in the text by Aryadeva, famous Indian saint, who was a disciple of Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna was one of the great Mahayana teachers after the Buddha, some 400 years after the Buddha, who reinvigorated the Mahayana tradition that had been sort of underground up till then. Mahayana teachings were sort of a little, in a sense, too radical for the time, for the masses at the time. So Aryadeva was a disciple of Nagarjuna's, and in one famous quotation in his texts, a text of his, he says that this basic ignorance, this avidya that believes in the I, that grasps to it as true, is really there, that just sort of basic belief in a self, innately, it's not like intellectual belief, something innate, that pervades all of our delusions in the same way that the body sense, the tactile sense, pervades our entire body, and even pervades our other senses. It pervades your eyeball and your ear organ and your nose and so forth. In the same way that the body sense pervades the whole body, ignorance pervades all of the other delusions. What that means is that, in a sense, it precedes them and is integrated with them to a certain extent. Without that ignorance, the delusions, the other delusions, attachment, anger, and so forth, would have no way of forming, because they're all based on this sense of an I. So if you can recognize through your own experience in meditation that the I that's appearing is like an illusion, like a mirage, you have some real experience of that. When you arise from that meditation, your behavior will be different, as long as that insight is still remembered, or has been, an imprint of that insight has been put in your mind. How do we make that insight more and more permanent in our mind? By meditating, familiarizing with that. That's what we mean by meditation, familiarizing with a wholesome object. The more you familiarize with it, it's like taking, the paper that you used to get in grade school, what do you call it, construction paper, something, you rolled it up. Once it's rolled up and you try to flatten it out, it has a certain memory of the being rolled, right? Or let's say if you fold a piece of paper, you try to put it down, there's still that line. You'd have to use all sorts of, maybe an iron or something to try to get rid of that fold. That would be very nice if we could, right now, we're familiar with all sorts of bad states of mind. Our mind naturally gravitates toward attachment and anger and jealousy and pride. That's how our mind is rolled or habituated. What we'd like to do is unroll our mind, or as Robert Thurman says, reformat the human hard drive. That'd be nice if you could reformat, right? But here, it's not just, you might think that maybe scientists could do that someday with some electrodes in the brain, just zapping it, and then you go back to zero, and they could put in Microsoft DOS or hopefully Apple. It's not, from a Buddhist perspective, the brain is not the source of our mind. It's an adjunct for short-term memory and other things. The mind is something which is immaterial. It's of a different nature than matter. So to reformat the human hard drive you want, the ignorance in our mind, to get rid of that, you have to work on the mind with the mind. You can't do it with electrodes or chemicals or radiation or anything else. You have to work on it with the mind. You have to develop wisdom. Another factor of the mind, wisdom that sees this apparent self. And I'm pointing here to the center of the chest, because that's often what we do when we say, I. I want it. It's me. You don't point here. Some people, I think Japanese sometimes, when they say I, they point here. Do you know that? I'm not sure why. But there's an innate sense of I. Have you ever seen that people do that? Me. Actually, maybe because the heart chakra is where the innate, subtlemost mind is. Anyway, another story. So there is, within our mind, there is an ignorance that's always there, that's existed in one form or another in all our lifetimes. It arises due to imprints, again, whether we're a cow, when we're in hell realm, whether we're a god, when we're a human. Belief in the sense of an I that appears to us. We believe in that. That's called avidya, ignorance. We can develop a wisdom that recognizes this I as empty. It is appearing, but it doesn't exist the way that it appears. Like, for instance, a mirage does exist, does it not? But it's empty of water. We wouldn't say that a mirage doesn't exist. You can see a mirage. You can see an illusion. You can see a reflection. Let's say a reflection is empty of, if you see a reflection of your own face, you don't think that's you in there, do you? Maybe your parakeet thinks the reflection in the mirror is another, maybe it doesn't think it's them, they think it's another parakeet, right? Or a deer, the classic thing where doe looks into a pond for the first time and sees its reflection, thinks there's another doe, another deer in there. The wisdom that recognizes that the self is empty, it's appearing but is empty, that counteracts the ignorance and can erode that ignorance over time so that it no longer functions. It can be eliminated from our mind. This is what's called cessation, the truth of cessation, one of the Four Noble Truths. The ceasing of ignorance, which is the cause of all our suffering. So it's the ceasing of suffering and the cause of suffering. The cause of suffering is basically this ignorance that's grasping to our self-identity. So the yogis and yoginis, they spend maybe many months patiently just watching this, trying to let the I appear very clearly. So how can we do that? How can we practice that? You can bring to mind some ego-stimulating thought. Like someone's blamed you undeservedly, and from your opinion, or something. You think, I. At that point, just watch, like someone says, you're stupid, or you burned the omelet, or you didn't do, you're wrong, or something, At that point, or when someone, cuts you off in the car, your ego rises very, what are you doing? You got in front of me? Do you know what I mean? Road rage, there's a good example. Or fear, something fearful, when the I appears very, very, very clearly. What the meditators in the past did was to actually seek out situations when fear would rise very strongly for the purpose of identifying the sense of I and how the mind is reacting to it. Can you believe that? There's a practice that was brought to Tibet from India. It's not a Tibetan practice, but became very widespread in Tibet, called Chö. Sometimes if you see it spelled, you might say it's Chod, C-H-O-D, but it's not. The D is not pronounced in Tibet. Chö. Chö means to cut off or to slay. So it was a kind of practice. One of the aims of it was to cause this sense of I, the innate sense of I, the subtlemost sense of I, innately always there. Not the intellectual, I'm American, I'm a woman, I'm a man, whatever, I'm a Packer fan. Oh, excuse me, this is Washington. I'm a Redskin fan. Not those, but the subtlemost sense of I, and to then observe how the mind is reacting to that. Does it go along with that? To observe the innate self-grasping. So what they would do is to go sometime to a charnel ground. Nowadays we don't have charnel grounds. You know what charnel grounds were? Does anyone know?
Like a cemetery or something.
Yeah, like a cemetery. Could be where bodies were burned, but generally there were places where dead bodies were placed to be devoured by the animals, the elements to rot away. So it's like smelly place probably. You could call them cemeteries. Usually we bury bodies in the West, right? You could call that, the Tibetans call it burial by the element of earth. There's sky burials where you bring bodies up to the top of a mountain and you let them be eviscerated by the air and so forth, the sky, but especially vultures come and eat the bodies. There's burial by fire, where you cremate. There's burial by water, where you put the corpse in the river or the lake, and it's devoured by the animals and the bacteria in them. The charnel grounds were places where the bodies were put, not necessarily burned. Oftentimes people were very poor. So you would go to the charnel ground, and it would be often a place in which, if you go at night, with no moon light,
Casper.
yeah, but not that friendly white guy. This is every shadow you see, much fear rises. So they would go with that purpose. They would have a particular practice they're going to do. They would even call the spirits that might inhabit the charnel ground. They would have a thigh bone trumpet to remind them of death. One of the tantric implements. and blow kind of this trumpet sound, calling the spirits. They have a very big drum, a large damaru, a huge one, that would play also, kind of, that the skin of which was made from human skin in some cases. You think too much, right? So in that case, one of the purposes of this, besides imagining offering your own body to them, so developing incredible merit, working on the bodhicitta, conventional bodhicitta, but also working on this wisdom of emptiness, wisdom of selflessness, because when the self appears, at that point, they would meditate on selflessness. Not just saying the self doesn't appear, doesn't exist, That's not enough. You need some logic. You need to have meditated beforehand and understood why, in what way this self doesn't exist the way that it appears. That it is empty, it is actually empty of existing that way. So the yoginis, it's said that the meditation on emptiness is the ultimate antidote to fear. I'm not sure if I mentioned here in Washington this time the story about one great meditator who we met at Kopan many years ago, I think after the 7th meditation course, a Lanrim meditation course at Kopan. He was an old man at the time, died since then. He was called Gomchen Kapala. Gomchen literally means great meditator. Gom means meditate, Chen means great. So he's a great meditator. But he was considered to be the reincarnation of a famous Tibetan yogi called Tongtang Gyalpo. I don't know if any of you have heard of Tongtang Gyalpo. Anyway, Tongtang Gyalpo was a tantric meditator in the past whose guru made him build bridges along these perilous passes in Tibet made of iron chain links. He's often, the iconography of Tongtang Gyalpo is often with many little links of chain around his body. Anyway, Gomchen Kapala was talking to us meditators. He was marveling at we Westerners who were there meditating on the Lam Rim, stages of the path. He said, so many Tibetans, they just want to do high tantric meditation. They don't realize the necessity to build a foundation like this. They want to build the edifice at the top, the penthouse, tantra, consort practice or something like that. But without building the basement, the foundation, the first floor, I was mentioning the other day, you can do that. You could put up the scaffolding, like in India, the bamboo scaffolding, and build some little thing up there. But when you take away the scaffolding, it's going to fall down, right? You don't have anything below it, no foundation. So he's telling us this, and he was telling a story about how he was meditating in a cave in the Himalayas, and within that cave he had put up a little tent for more protection from the elements because the cave was still cold. While he was meditating, he sensed some presence walking around the tent, kind of like the Casper, but this was something more physical. Wasn't an animal. I wasn't sure, was it some guy coming to steal or what? So he meditated on emptiness. Why would he do that? To overcome the fear. A very strong fear was rising. Often when we're fearful, we react with anger. This is why we might strike out at others out of fear, that they might be imperiling us. We get incapacitated. So he meditates on emptiness. When he arises from that meditation, the presence is gone. So he continues on his meditations for some days, comes down to the village. He's up here in the mountains. Comes down to this village where there's a little shop. Some weeks later, days later, and he said, he tells the shopkeeper before he has a chance to tell, before Gumption has a chance to tell the shopkeeper what happened. The shopkeeper says, "Oh, have you heard what happened up in the mountain up there? There was a Yeti the other day." Do you know what the Yeti is? The, what does they say? Abominable snowman?
Sasquatch.
Pasquatch.
Bigfoot.
Bigfoot. Sasquatch, not Pasquatch. So, whether you believe that or not, there was something around his tent. So that realization of emptiness, of selflessness, when there's no longer a sense of self that you're grasping onto, there's no longer a sense of fear of something you have to protect. So all life's problems, it doesn't mean that you don't have any other solution. You still have to pay your bills. You're still subject to karma and its repercussions. But the emotional responses that we have, the ignorance, the attachment, the anger, all are like cut off at the knee when you realize selflessness. Now, in the Mahayana teachings, the Buddha extended the understanding of selflessness. He said, well, maybe, has anyone here not heard of the Heart Sutra? I'm not sure. Have you heard of the Heart Sutra? Okay. It's called the Heart of Wisdom Sutra. It's a very brief discourse. Actually, the Buddha says very few words in the whole discourse. There's about a dozen words at the very end. He's in meditation on Vulture's Peak in India when he was teaching. And there's a discourse going on between one of the Buddha's disciples, Shariputra, who is the preeminent in wisdom of all the Buddha's Hinayana disciples, Theravada disciples, best in wisdom, Shariputra. You've heard of Shariputra, right? He's asking the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara is the Bodhisattva. When we talk about the Buddha of Avalokiteshvara, we say the Buddha of compassion. Avalokiteshvara means he who looks down upon the world with mercy, with pity. That's what the literal translation of Avalokiteshvara. Do we have some names in English or Spanish or other languages that have something like that? He who looks down or she who is compassionate. Probably has some names. So, Shariputra, the Buddha is meditating on emptiness. Shariputra is asking Avalokiteshvara, hey, how do the Bodhisattvas meditate on wisdom? I know how we Theravadas, we meditate on, we followers of the Shravakayana, how we meditate on selflessness of persons. I know that. But how do the Bodhisattvas meditate on wisdom? This is in what's called the Heart Sutra. And Avalokiteshvara says, the Bodhisattvas recognize the emptiness of the aggregates also. He goes on to elaborate many other things, so that's a crucial thing. Some of you know that line I'm talking about? Alexandra, do you know that line? Bodhisattvas meditate on the emptiness of the aggregates also, emptiness of inherent existence of the aggregates also. What that means is not only the emptiness of the self, selflessness, that the self doesn't exist the way it appears, but even the basis upon which you label the self, your body and mind, your five aggregates, each of those in turn also is devoid of some kind of self-existence, inherent existence. You might say, okay, I know there's no self, but hell, the body exists, the mind exists. Something findable. Self is kind of a little more ephemeral, phantom-like. I can see that doesn't exist. But the Bodhisattvas meditate on the emptiness of the aggregates also. Skandhas, Indian word skandhas. It means that skandha actually means heap, pile. Did you know that? the 5 heaps, or the 5 piles. Like if you were to take apart your car, you know, I know Alexandra has the same year and model as my car. We both have 97 Toyota Corollas. Oldies. So if you were to take apart the car, Toyota, trying to find the essence of the Toyota Corolla, where is it, you know? You put all of the glass from the windows in one pile, one heap. You heap up all the metal, let's say the aluminum, if there's aluminum in it, there's some aluminum. Maybe there's more steel and iron, big pile of that. There'll be a pile of petroleum products, the gasoline and the oil. What else? Rubber. Maybe ours don't have leather, do they? Other random things. Everything that doesn't fit in the other aggregates. It's called compositional factors, you know, the carpeting and other things. Once you look at all those piles, you realize that once you've taken away all those things, there's no Toyota Corolla left. Right? That's one way of meditating on selflessness. When you take away the 5 aggregates, the body, the feelings, sensations, the discriminations within our mind, the ability to discriminate one thing from another, the compositional factors, which means kind of like everything else, like the carpet and everything, and the consciousness, the bare primary consciousness. You take away all those things. You de-evolve the person into those 5 heaps or piles, those 5 aggregates, those 5 skandhas. There's nothing left. So, traditionally, in the Theravada meditation on selflessness, one would see, oh, there's no self. The person is empty of a self, or has no self, anatma. But Avalokiteshvara said, even those piles, those aggregates, are empty of inherent existence also. Let's take the body, the sense of the body. You might think, okay, the self is not the body. Self doesn't really exist. It's just something named to the body and mind. But the body exists. But you look at it in the same way that you investigate the self. There is a sense of body being one thing, the body. But the body is comprised of many parts. Your head, your torso, your arms, your legs. Even one of those parts, let's say the arm, is comprised of parts. The upper arm, the lower arm. They have different names? What would you say? Thigh, calf, the leg. You have some similar kind of name for it?
Bicep,
Well, yeah, that's muscle, right? Bicep, right? Isn't it?
Forearm?
Oh, yeah, forearm, upper arm, okay. Hand has parts. It's not one thing. And then even the hand, 5 digits, and then the palm. The body also exists as something ephemeral, phantom-like, simply labeled to that collection of parts. We say Gabe's body, Mike's body. You can't find the body, if you take one pore or one part of the body, you wouldn't say that's the body. But like if you watch one of these crime shows on TV in the operating room, they say, oh, here's a part of the body, but that's not the body yet, right? The body seems to be the whole thing, but the body is just a name that we label to that collection of parts. In the same way that the self seems to be one thing, but is just labeled to a collection of parts. So in the Mahayana teachings, in the great vehicle for the bodhisattvas that are working for enlightenment, not just for nirvana, the Buddha emphasized 2 kinds of emptiness. The emptiness of persons, which is essentially anatma, no self, selflessness, and the emptiness of other phenomena other than the person, including the aggregates, trees, houses, fields, water. All of these things to our senses seem to be there from their own side. They seem to have an inherent existence. What can be noticed sometimes more prominently is that sense of existence when it's something that you own. It's a possession of yours, like your car. Has anyone here had a car that's ever been, I guess the word that's used in the East Coast here, or in the United States is when it's been keyed? You know that expression? Someone takes a key apparently and they're mad at you from the line in the post office or something, and they see your car and they leave a big scratch along the side. No one's ever had that done? Jeff, come on. That's something. I'm teasing. Yeah, something that you have. The first time that you spilled some gravy or some soup on your new shirt or dress. Has that ever happened to you?
No.
Not to you, Chuck. But to Sharon. Yeah, we can. Suddenly, it's something so intimate to us because it seems very important that it's pristine. We have many kinds of intellectual, ramifications why that's important to us, that it shouldn't be stained. But there's a certain sense of reality of that, and that reality has now is now imperfect because of the stain. If you realize the emptiness of the shirt or the emptiness of the car, that there was no real shirt there, where is the shirt that your mind is thinking of? Of course, other ignorant people are still going to say, there's a stain on your shirt, or your car is a scratch. But just talking about your own wisdom, once you realize there's no real Toyota Corolla, there's no real Chevy, what is it? No, that Jeff's car, Cruise. Once you recognize that it doesn't exist the way that our mind is believing it to exist, is that there's some real inherent identity there, it's very liberating. There's not going to be the same type of reaction. Of course, as you realize that emptiness more and more, deeper and deeper, there will be no reaction whatsoever. At first, there's still going to be, but darn, it's still scratched, right? But it will be mitigated somehow by that recognition of emptiness. There are many examples that Buddha gave to try to illustrate emptiness. One of the examples I mentioned before was the example of the mirage, right? The mirage seems to be water, but we could say it's empty of water. We could use that terminology. Also, the example of the reflection in a mirror we talked about. One example that I'd had a lot of problem over the years was the example of an echo. Did I give that example? Did I talk about this before? The Buddha said, like an echo. And I was thinking, wow, I wasn't quite sure how to apply that. But a couple of years ago, when I was at Deer Park, at our monastery outside of Madison, Wisconsin, late at night I was saying some prayers, some mantras, walking down the road in front. It was very late, 2 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning. And a little bit overcast night. There was this one naughty dog that lives over here. So here's the road. The monastery is over here. And there's this one dog that lives on this farm that always chases cars. You know that kind of dog? When the cars go down the road, and it's just, ugh. And it had been, the rear legs were broken because it inevitably happens that they get caught and some car runs over their legs. So it's chasing, it's barking, chasing me. It barks, and then I hear another dog from another farm over here bark, and then another one bark in response. And this one barks, and this barks, and this barks. And it's going on. I think, boy, these dogs are uncreative. Why don't they just bark on their own sometime? I'm thinking this, there's really a dog over there, there's really a dog over there. And then I realized, there's no dog over there. That's an echo. That's an echo. And it's just like, suddenly something clicked about this example that the Buddha gave of an echo. The sense that the source of the sound was somewhere out there. That there was real autonomous source of the sound. Not just the source of because the source of the sound is out there, the reflection, the echo, the source of it is out there, but as though there was an autonomous source of the sound out there. Very, 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 very tasty kind of experience. Whoa. Sometimes we say in Buddhism that when we hear harsh words, or abusive words or something, that they're the echo of words that we've spoken in the past. Not in the sense of bouncing off some stone face or something, but karmically. Do you understand what I mean? We think that the source of the harsh words are that person out there, but actually, they're like an echo. They were actually created by us in the past. That's a useful way to think in terms of karma. So in the Mahayana, the Buddha expanded his explanation about emptiness. Why? Why didn't he teach it so much in the Theravada, in the Hinayana teachings? Because it's said that to achieve nirvana, you have to have a very great sense of renunciation of samsara. You're not your main motivation is not bodhicitta, the motivation of the bodhisattvas, but the motivation of renunciation to escape from samsara. You abstain from pleasures to a certain degree. That can't be kept up for many, many lifetimes. Usually in the Theravada tradition, you achieve nirvana in 1, 2, 3, 5, up to 16 lifetimes. If you don't achieve nirvana in that time, usually the sense of motivation has petered out. And to achieve that realization, it's sufficient. It says a relatively short number of lifetimes, just, maybe a dozen lifetimes or fewer. So you don't need many reasonings about emptiness, just this one reasoning of the selflessness of the person, which you will understand is applicable to other things, but your main source, your main investigation is the selflessness of the person. On the other hand, the Bodhisattva path, the Bodhisattva's goal is to remain in cyclic existence, working for the benefit of sentient beings while they're trying to achieve enlightenment, which might take 3 countless great eons. Now, countless great eon doesn't mean like it sounds. Countless sounds like just, you're saying, just a whole bunch, right? A zillion. Countless actually is a particular number. Did you know that? Countless is, in mathematical formulation, 10 to the 59th. Like we have different names, million, billion, trillion for different things, right? So in Sanskrit, the same thing, which came into Tibetan, that number, 10 to the 59th, there was, maybe because this is mentioned in the Buddhist scriptures, but they don't give names to the particular numbers bigger than that. Generally, do you know anything? Say, what do you know? 1,000, million, billion, what comes next? Trillion, then?
Zillion.
No, there's no zillion. Quadrillion, quintillion, septillion, there's something, but after a certain point, we don't know, ordinary people don't know the names of those numbers, right? They don't have particular numbers. We just say 1 followed by 72 zeros or something, right? So the time that bodhisattvas might remain within cyclic existence, trying to accumulate the merit and wisdom to actualize Buddhahood could take up to 3 countless great eons. A great eon is the time that the world evolves, remains, is destroyed, and the world system, the universe system remains empty. So in cosmic terms, we don't, trillions of years, that's a great eon. But 3 countless great eons, that's the amount of time. So in that amount of time, the bodhisattva needs to have at their disposal many, many different logical reasonings to understand emptiness. The emptiness of walking, the emptiness of coming and going, the emptiness of birth and death. Not just the emptiness of the self. They exercise themselves in many different logical reasons, not just the emptiness of the self, but the emptiness of other phenomena. So that's why the Buddha, one of the reasons why the Buddha didn't, in the Theravada teachings, the Hinayana teachings, did not talk so much about shunyata. In fact, emptiness. You don't find that term mentioned in the Hinayana scriptures almost at all. And even when it is mentioned, it's talking about something else, some different meaning of emptiness. Usually in the Hinayana scriptures, all you find is the term anattama, no self, selflessness. In the Mahayana teachings, the Buddha expanded that to talk about emptiness, shunyata. Have you heard that term before, shunyata? Anyone? Who has not heard the term shunyata before? Okay, you heard tonight. It's your first time. Shunya is an Indian word that means empty. Shunyata, the ata at the end kind of means ness, the state of being empty, emptiness. So shunya means empty. Empty, not just in the usual sense. You don't say, give me another beer, my glass is empty. You don't say shunya in that situation. Shunya refers to something that appears to have some kind of presence, like a bubble or a balloon. And you would say, it's shunya, it's empty. That's the sense of that word. Presence, but it doesn't have the same kind of existence that, the mind is thinking. You don't use the word for just that, is the bottle of Coke half full or half shunya? You don't use a shunya that way. So the Buddha talked about emptiness or shunyata. Empty is shunya, or void, sometimes void or voidness, same word, of all phenomena. What that means is to our senses, due to imprints from beginningless lifetimes, everything that we encounter, which is actually malleable and changing in every moment, is actually what we call a dependent arising. It is arising dependent on causes and conditions. It's arising in a more subtle sense, dependent upon the consciousness that perceives a collection of parts, that recognizes their coherency and gives a name to them. Person, kitty cat, rabbit, dog, tree, car, United States, Labor Department. Where is the Labor Department? What is the Labor Department? You might have some idea. It's just a name we label to a certain organization. It includes employees. What is the Labor Department if you try to define it? One of the pitfalls of talking about emptiness is that sometimes people misinterpret and think that emptiness means that conventional phenomena do not exist. You might think, oh, it's empty. You might feel guilty about stealing or saying some harsh words or swatting the fly. And then you think, oh, it doesn't matter. It's empty. Right? That's a misinterpretation of emptiness. phenomena do exist. You know, once you take away the projection of our mind, that there's some findable existence, when you take it away, there's still the conventional existence there, the dependent arising, which is a result of the outer causation and inner causation, our own karma, our own reaction to things is due to our own karma. So those individuals who have realized emptiness are even more cautious about creating negative karma. They try to avoid creating negative karma, and they're more conscientious in creating virtuous karma, because they know the virtuous karma will have a conventional result in the future. In some senses, from a bodhisattva point of view, it will allow them to have more resources to help sentient beings. If you watch your speech and you don't lie and exaggerate and criticize, your speech will become more powerful. If you speak truth, if you speak gently, encouragingly, without divisiveness, you bring people together, that kind of speech karmically becomes very strong. And in the future lives, when you speak, your speech will have more influence to benefit sentient beings. When you say that, past and future lives exist, and that karma, our actions, have repercussions in future lives, people will be more prone to believe you because of your care in your speech. So those who understand emptiness don't abandon the observation of karma. Do you know what I mean by observation of karma? I don't mean observing it. Karma. There's a green one. There's a red one. Observation, here the observation of karma means observing it in the sense of abstaining from negative karma and conscientiously creating virtuous karma. That's what's meant by observing the law. You may say observing the laws of karma. Don't we say that in English? Someone observes the laws? Or is there another word? You follow the laws. Can you say observe the laws?
Yeah.
So it's in that sense we're talking about observing karma, observing the laws of karma. Let me ask you, we've got a little while left. There may be something about emptiness that has perplexed you, or maybe what I've said tonight has perplexed you. And let me give the floor over to you for a while, and that may give us an idea of where to proceed from here. Anyone have a question they'd like to ask? Alexander.
Yeah. Today I went to a memorial service for a colleague in the afternoon, and last time I saw him was like 10 days ago. He was perfectly fine. There was nothing wrong with him, and medically he had just an event. People want to know. He just had a pulmonary embolism, out of the blue. So he died, last Thursday, and we knew on Friday, so we were all shocked. So I went to the service today, and his body was there, right? But to me, that's my reaction was, that's his body, his corpse. It's not him.
Yeah. So
that's a good way to see that, his eye doesn't exist, right? Because that's not his body. So all the aggregates, everything is gone. But except his consciousness, right? Because his consciousness still exists. Although in the Heart Sutra it's considered in the 5 skandhas.
Yeah. Well, the gross consciousness is gone.
Right.
Let's say the person's name was James.
Right.
James's
Right.
gross
Right.
consciousness of this lifetime that thought, I am
Yeah.
James, I work for the Cancer Institute or whatever,
Right.
that gross consciousness is gone. At the time of death, like falling asleep, that gross consciousness absorbs. But then when the subtlemost mind leaves the body,
Mm-hmm.
with the karmic instincts and so forth, that gross consciousness doesn't emit again. That only was a remnant, a karmic manifestation of this lifetime within this body, James's physical body. When it enters into the bardo state, the intermediate state,
Mm-hmm.
there'll be a new recognition. I am this, if it's born as a cow or a god or a human or a dog or a hell being, it's a recognition, I'm a cow. Not, doesn't say, cow doesn't think I'm a cow, but thinks this is me. I'm this. There's an innate sense of I. There's an innate grasping to that.
Even after death?
Yeah, even in the bardo state, that ignorance remains until we escape from cyclic existence. That's what keeps us at the time of death. That's what accelerates the ripening of karmic seeds on our consciousness that will throw us into the next lifetime. That ignorance. Craving, in the 12 links, craving, grasping, becoming. What is it, the 8th, 9th, 10th links? Craving means the craving to be reborn. Then grasping means strongly craving that. Becoming is when that craving and grasping has nurtured the karmic seed in our mind so that it's just ready to sprout. It's not yet there, but it's becoming. It's about to take rebirth, or about ready to throw us into the next lifetime. Nurtured seed. So what does leave this body is a subtle mind and subtle wind, which is like a body. Subtle material, they're inseparable, just like in this lifetime our consciousness, all of our consciousnesses are mounted like a horse rider on a horse. I like to use Italian, like cavallo and cavaliero. Is that Italian? I pronounce right? The horse and the horse rider. Like the two, if they're, the wind, the prana, the energy currents within our body, which are material, are never separated from the consciousness, which is like the rider. What moves it around is the wind. What moves our consciousness is the wind, subtle winds within our body. The consciousness, however, itself, its nature is immaterial, clear in knowing. But somehow it always has an intimate connection, like when we talked about the conventional and ultimate truths, like the two sides of a medallion. Consciousness and its mounted wind are never separated. You can't take the consciousness away from the wind. They're inseparably bonded. So the subtlemost mind is joined with the subtlemost wind. So as soon as it enters the intermediate state, that wind takes a configuration of a subtle body called the bardo body. When it enters into the next life, let's say if you're born as a human, into the embryo, into the fertilized egg, let's say, and then that wind and consciousness, subtle wind and consciousness, over time begin to permeate as the organs grow of that fetus. They permeate, the gross consciousness begins to come out. There may even be a sense of self at some time, very soon. But that's the gross consciousness, not the subtlemost consciousness. Subtlemost consciousness in wind has no sense of I, no sense of, I am Alexandra, I was,
Because the scriptures and the book, they say that that's a good time to, when you talk about clear light, is that because you have the most sense of the, you can realize that the I doesn't exist, and so then have,
there's a relationship with that, but when it's talking about the time of death, talking about our own death, the meditator, not so much the people watching us, from the outside. But at that time, if we're trained in watching the dissolution of the elements, like we were talking in our seminar of the weekends in Death and Dying, if you're familiar with that, you can watch the mind, the gross mind's absorbing without fear, without being distracted by other thoughts, and watch the various inner appearances to the consciousness as subtler and subtler minds become apparent. When the gross minds are absorbing, the subtlemost mind is more apparent. It's like this, during the daytime, although the stars are shining, we don't see the stars during the day because of the prominence of the sunlight. It's reflecting off the atmosphere, and we see the blue light from the sky and so forth. If there was suddenly an eclipse of the sun at 12 noon, or sometime when the sun is very bright, we can see the stars. The stars were there all the time. It's a little bit like that. When the gross consciousnesses are absorbing, the subtle consciousnesses that are always there become more apparent. So that we have the white appearance, the red increase, the black near attainment. And then finally, when even those are gone away, the subtlemost mind becomes very stark and apparent. This is called the clear light of death. A little bit like the experience that we're meditating on, the clear light nature of the gross mind. There is a clear light nature of the subtlemost mind. So this meditation that we do at the beginning of the class is not just some random, ridiculous, useless, unrelated kind of thing. At the time of death, the clear light of death, subtlemost mind becomes apparent when the other gross minds go away. Like when the sun is eclipsed, and maybe say even the stars were eclipsed, you might notice the astronomers then, when there's no other noise, light noise, they might notice some other nebula way out there that's, do you know what I'm saying? Something so subtle that its perception is precluded by this other, input. So the clear light of death, that clear light, that means the experience of that subtlemost mind, which is like what we're trying to meditate here on, the clear light nature of the gross mind. They both have that same kind of nature. If one is able to graft to this experience all the time the remembrance of the meaning of emptiness, at that time there can arise a remembering consciousness. Not only is this clear light, you perceive that, but it clicks. This is the meaning of emptiness. The self doesn't exist the way that it appears. Phenomena, you won't have any verbalization like this, but the memory of these realizations that you've had with the grosser states of mind can be recalled due to a certain process of remembering at each stage as you can, making a very strong determination at the clear light of death to remember the meaning of emptiness. Then at that point, the very, very fine yogis and yoginis, the very fine meditators, they can use that death experience to leave a deep imprint of the meaning of emptiness on that subtlemost mind. Because all of the gross minds have absorbed in a way that they'll never come out again this lifetime. James, or whatever the gentleman's name was who passed away, or the lady who passed, was it?
Rod.
Rod is not, that gross consciousness at the time of death is never going to come out again that lifetime. It's finally absorbed into the subtlemost mind. And with that subtlemost clear light mind, if it can meditate on emptiness, that can leave a very strong imprint to accelerate the process of having a direct realization of emptiness, maybe to achieve enlightenment even in one lifetime. There are processes through secret mantra, tantra, Buddhist tantra, where the bodhisattva doesn't have to wait 3 countless great eons to accumulate the merit and wisdom to achieve enlightenment, but through a process like this, by meditating with that subtlemost mind during the life, through actualizing it during the life, and then at the time of death, actualizing it, they could even achieve enlightenment in the intermediate state, the bardo state. Okay, so let's leave that question. See if does anyone else have have another question? It doesn't have to be as profound as Alexandra's. Yes. What's your name?
I'm Nicole.
Hi, Nicole.
I'm not sure if it's totally formulated question yet, so if anyone wants to help me with it, that's great. I'm thinking about emptiness, and it almost makes more sense to me that at the end of a life, the idea of letting go of self, anatma, and emptiness that you've described sort of makes sense to me. But in the middle of a life, for example, what I'm thinking of is like letting go of a relationship. Or, you talked about if someone keys your car, you have an attachment to that and it creates emotions, and you have to let go of that. But with something that's closer, like letting go of a relationship or a person, that emptiness has got to be, because basically what you're doing is you're trying to envision a person or a part of your life is empty. How do you do that? It's not the same as a car.
Yeah. Well, here, the thing that really hurts when, the Buddha talked about suffering. He talked about various kinds of suffering. One of the sufferings was the suffering of meeting with that which is unpleasant, separating from that which is pleasant, and never finding what we want. Those are very sort of human-like experiences that we don't often think of. This is part and parcel of samsara. Inevitably meeting up with something that's unpleasant. Traffic jams, headaches, criticism. Being separated from what's pleasant, like losing our relationships, our friends, things go wrong. Losing what we thought we had. And then never finding what we want. Like the people always wanting to find a friend, wanting to find success, wanting to be rich, never finding it. It's sort of frustration. So let's talk about this one, the separating from what's pleasant. I mentioned some of the other classes. This is the sort of quintessential element of all blues music. My baby done left me. Right? Who's that? Who sang that? Was that Elvis? There's some guitar riff, or if that's the right term, the chord, da 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 da. My baby done left me. Something like that. It can be you lost your job at the dinette, your tractor was stolen, or you lost your car or your camera or whatever. But most personal to us is our loved ones, relationships. So if you could recognize, and I forget your name again. Your name? Nicole. If you could recognize part of the hurt, a large portion of the hurt, is that there's a real Nicole who is the owner of your body and mind, who's the experiencer, who is feeling this, let's say, if it were you, feeling this heartache. If you recognize that Nicole is just a figment of your imagination, like when you wake up from a dream, you've been chased by these dogs. They're coming up, they're about to bite you, they're just biting at your ankles, and then you wake up and it's your kitty cat licking your ankles, and you realize, it was just a dream. It was totally devoid of the reality that I had attributed to it, those dogs chasing me. At that point, it's not demeaning the importance of people, the relationships, or the love that we felt, but the hurt that we're experiencing is based upon a sense of self, belief in self, this ignorance that's grasping to the self. If you recognize that self that doesn't exist, you'd be incredibly liberated. All of that suffering. I mentioned before the fear, like Gomshen in the tent when he meditated on emptiness. The fear of the person walking around was gone. Also, the sense of loss. There is no Nicole that lost something. There's still remnant. You know, when we're just having the first glimpse of understanding of selflessness or emptiness, that may help a little, but then again our heart aches, we rationalize, our mind thinks. You have to meditate again and again on this. But at a certain point when you realize that, when you've extinguished more and more of that ignorance grasping to the self, you recognize there was never a person the way that I thought, an autonomous person back here, the owner of my body and mind. Nicole is just a name labeled to this dependent origination that's thrown by karma in the past. Has a body, has a mind, it's changing moment by moment. It's something that has to be thought about again and again. Also, the subject of emptiness is not something that is easy to understand. It's considered to be very, very profound. It's not something that appears ordinarily to people over the ages, you know, like Isaac Newton didn't discover emptiness, or, you know, you might think, oh, Einstein must have thought of it, something. It's not something that is intellectually accessible, generally. It has to be almost taught from the outside by an enlightened being. Anyway, this is a good place to stop. Yes, you have one last
I was
question.
just going to say, to make the experience be less solid, it is less solid in your mind once you start to deconnect your perception of the reality.
The solidity, the grasping, once you feel that there's less Nicole, less solid Nicole, even if it's not completely become transparent or, you know, evaporated, and also whatever person, whatever thing, whatever dog or cat or lover was lost, to meditate like in the Mahayana on the emptiness of that person also. From the very beginning, they never existed the way that our mind thought. It takes time. Let's dedicate our merits. Thank you for taking the opportunity to try to generate some virtuous karma tonight. So sit comfortably. Take a moment to let your mind look inside, look at itself. One part of the mind observing the rest of the mind. Whatever content is there, look beyond it. Recognize that the nature of the mind that allows that content is one of clarity and knowing, vast spaciousness. The clear light of death, there won't be any kinds of karmically arisen images or thoughts or comments. But this gross mind has the same nature, same clear light nature as the subtlemost mind. We can train ourselves to let go of the thoughts. I think this evening I've created some virtuous karma through motivating at the beginning for the welfare of sentient beings to understand about emptiness. Due to these merits, may they quickly ripen in my deeper and deeper understanding of emptiness, not simply as an intellectual fascination, but to transform my practice to become more kind, more loving, more compassionate, to be able to give up the solid sense of I, working just for myself, and begin to work for numberless living beings who are still under the influence of this ignorance grasping to their self-identity. Feeling compassion, empathy for them. Due to these merits, may I quickly practice the Bodhisattva path, achieve enlightenment for the sake of all these living beings, due to these merits that I've created this evening.